So hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for checking us out, checking in. So this is going to answer or talk about it. I don't know if I'm going to answer it. Talk about a question that Out Bubba had brought up in one of the last farm report videos. He asked about what are we going to do for animal feed in the SHTF, and that's a really good question because it's going to be really tough, especially around here in the desert. You don't have a lot that's going to grow, and once the animals eat it, it's going to have to wait. It's hard to regrow things unless you're able to water real quick or whatnot, because we use a lot of alfalfa, hay, and whatnot. I think one thing primarily we'd have to do is we'd have to cull the herd from what we've got now. That's for sure. We wouldn't be able to support the number of animals we have on everything we grow internally, at least not yet. I mean, from what we've done so far, but still what we grow, we have to water, and getting that reliable water source is a key part that we're going to have to work on. So that's a work in progress. I think the pumpkin is going to be a good, we've seen how much we can grow out of that this year. In just 2 rows of pumpkin, we've got pumpkins galore. Now that won't last all winter or whatnot, but it does seem to be a good, what are y'all chirping at? Birds are going crazy over here. But if we culled the herd and got it down to a smaller number, that would help. And I think one thing we've talked about is sectioning off the property, so we'd have it divided kind of into thirds, so that especially the goats and the sheep would graze on 1/3, rest another third, plant another third, or do whatever with it. Something like that, depending on how it went. And we definitely have to have smaller numbers to do that. We couldn't roll with the number of herd, the big herd we got now. We'd be down to, I mean, this number of acres. You're looking at 3 acres basically of what you could graze on. We'd be looking at 2-3 goats, 2-3 sheep. And the pigs, we could work into that rotation as well. We just would have to put up a good fence system so they couldn't root under if we didn't want them going everywhere. Because we could let the pigs graze. We don't have to have them pinned up necessarily, but they do. It's hard to keep them pinned in when you're trying to keep the goats from going over and the pigs just go under. It's a struggle. But that goes with anything else, though. If you got that going on, you're going to have outside competition trying to come in and take your feed as well, not just your human food, your animal feed. Having things like pumpkins that are human feed and dual purpose are going to be good. And if you saw, we didn't even grow 1/3 of that garden area this year. So if we were to go to half and like rest half, rotate half, we would have an oodle more of feed, corn, pumpkins, everything. So that would definitely be a good supplement through the winter. When it's a lot leaner in the grazing areas, the grasses aren't growing and whatnot. But it's not fully developed plan, so it's something we got to work on and really identify what we would do. It would be a giant culling if we identified that this is a long-term problem. We're going to have to, you know, if we run out of alfalfa resources or a hay source, would definitely have to be going to internal. And we can graze a little bit, like we could, I mean, it's SHTF. I mean, we could do the little shepherd boy and roam around, you know, the area and graze off what's kind of, you know, in no man's land, what's on the, I guess you could say public property, but, you know, kind of off easements, and everything's not fenced in. You could kind of just graze around. Maybe something to look at would be grazing off a neighbor's property if they wanted to share in some of the meat. That would be a reasonable exchange. I think that would be a long-term solution, because there's acres and acres around here that people don't have grazing. I mean, there's horses, and I know there's some sheep down, and there's some other people that have goats around, but it's not like herds and herds. So we could easily maybe look for a barter situation and be like, hey, can our guys graze here for a week or two, you know, come back through and rotate for the month, and when we go to butcher, you know, they get a quarter or something like that. That's always something to consider, especially when things are going bad. But that goes back to knowing your neighbors and how bad is it, right? But then you'd have to have the community effort and everybody pitching in. It'd be interesting to see what people would do with their horses in that situation, because there's a lot of horses, and there's definitely not the room for them to graze. The wild horses have a hard enough time, so that the wild horses would get thinned out, and then people's tame horses, if they didn't get released because people said they knew they couldn't feed them, especially older folks that can't feed their livestock, they might just turn it out, right? Let it fend for itself potentially. That'd be an interesting situation. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'd want to identify anybody like that and be like, hey, don't turn your animals out, because you're only going to attract coyotes and I don't know, poachers is probably a bad word, but people that are starving that need food are going to be trying to basically hunt what everybody's turning loose, dogs, cats, and otherwise. So a lot of tough stuff when if it gets really bad. We're talking about definitely a bad SHTF. But feeding the animals and pets and livestock and everything else is going to be difficult for everybody. Chickens can kind of get by. You know, you probably wouldn't have nearly the egg turnout during the winter because their feed wouldn't be as robust. But with everything that goes around, they can free range pretty good and get a lot of food. But you definitely have to supplement still with them. Especially if you needed the eggs, you'd have to supplement to keep them laying through the winter and whatnot. So good question about Bug Out Bubba. I think it's definitely a concern for anybody who has animals and hasn't got it all exactly figured out. I think everybody knows that they aren't going to be able to have the same number. So it'll be a big barbecue, and hopefully you have a big freezer, maybe doing a lot of jerky, et cetera, for a period of time. There's so many different situations. It would just depend, you know, on what went down. So that's a good question about Bug Out Bubba. Thanks for checking in, y'all. Live free.